And it's like, man, this is like,
to order.
and it's like, man, this is like.
Forgot about that part, okay.
All right. Can we have a roll call, please, Karen?
Sure. Commissioner Chappelle,
Here.
Commissioner Cohen,
Here.
Commissioner Oliveros,
Here.
Commissioner Source,
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Here.
Commissioner Jay.
Here.
And Commissioner Paraskovas is excused.
All right. Did everybody have a chance to review the minutes of the November 6, 2023 meeting?
Yeah.
Any corrections need to be noted?
I would move to approve.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Sorry.
We're out of practice.
Right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Motion passes. All right, well, I don't see many visitors, so I guess we can do a public comment. So we'll jump right, Fred, with staff reports and presentations.
Cool. Yeah, so what we're going to be talking about today is just 3 code changes. I think 2 of them will be as part of public hearings next time for you folks, but I wanted to take a look at them beforehand. And then one is something new that you would be seeing. It's about land use extensions. And so I figure we can go through them one at a time and potentially get out of here relatively quick. There is a video after everything. So anyways, so the first one is just those small changes to the code for House Bill 3395. You looked at this a couple of months ago, but I wanted to get it before you folks one more time. Just so you can see it, we're gonna have a public hearing on this. Really nothing has changed since last time, and it's a very simple code change. You feeling pretty good about that one? Any thoughts about that? Okay, that's specifically the one that would allow single-family residential or single room occupancies is what they're called. And it would use our codes definition, some of our code definitions, and that it would also allow affordable housing subject to a covenant in our commercial areas. Those are the 2 things we have to address as part of that legislative change. Is relatively simple. Yeah.
I did have a question, so if I can, yeah, thank you. So when you cited the code IDC 73, so I looked that up, and it said 4 spaces for every 5 guests, is that right?
Yeah.
So if they wanted to do a boarding house, you'd have to have 4 parking spots for every 5 guests you had. So if you had 10, theoretically, then you get 8 spots, right?
Exactly. And we wanted, that's specifically why we did it that way, was to use our existing code language rather than try and I had the concern that there was somehow the implication that what the House bill was trying to tell us to do was essentially treat it similar to a house. And I had the concern, if you do a house, then it's only 1 space potentially, and it was like, that doesn't make sense. And so talking with our attorney, she felt very comfortable using our existing code framework and just essentially pulling the state law and sort of trying to say, hey, this is how we regulate these things. But if there's an instance that is trying to use the state law, we're going to treat it like this. So, and she really encouraged me to keep the existing code framework that you have. Don't try and bend your code framework into something new based on this requirement, which she felt was somewhat poorly defined in the legislation. So that's what that is all about. And it's a really good question. Thanks for looking at 73, because I mean, that is specifically one of the reasons why we did that, was rather than calling it out as its own use, to essentially use a use that we have that's very similar and say, this is how we regulate this stuff. So the second one is the variance that we had talked about for lots less than 5,000 square feet in Hills Edition. You'll remember we identified the fact that Hills Edition allows a variance. You can go to minimum lot size. Typically, our minimum lot size in the community is 5,000 square feet. And certain portions of the town, or I should say in one portion of the town, we have a specific variance written in that says in Hills Edition, you can go to 4,500 square feet. I gave you folks the reasoning for that lot, the original staff report that Karen had found. Reasoning is great reasoning because most of the lots in Hills Edition are 9,800 square feet. It's about 3 feet too narrow for dividing it in half. And so they allowed folks to come in to you folks for a variance to divide lots in half. What it failed to do is apply it elsewhere that has very similar circumstances. And there's tons of lots in the community that have the exact same circumstance. So one of those is Hall's Edition. Right next to it, one of it is Patterson's Edition that has the exact same lot sizes. And so what this would do is try and sort of tweak those standards to apply to more areas. This is the first time that you're seeing this, but I tried to accommodate some of the language that we had talked about last time. Last time we talked about not creating funky looking lots. And so you'll see that I put any lot created under the provisions of this subsection will be rectangular or approximately rectangular in shape, right? So that's that thing. Any lot created, and then we also talked about having access to 2 streets. And so you'll see in B there, any lot created under the provisions of this section will have direct vehicular access to an adjacent improved street or alley. And then it specifically talks, if the alley is not improved, you have to improve it to the backside of your lot.
So, excuse me for interrupting, but how does that work with the post office not delivering to alleys?
They'll put a box, but they have.
But they won't go to the alley.
Yeah, and we talked about that last time. We talked about it last time.
I don't remember what the resolution was.
There was.
And there wasn't one last time, and I reached out to Monmouth. I said, how do you guys address alleys? I know that people have
Salem
units
has a
of,
bunch too, so
We
they might
have
be.
them
Off
in
alleys.
and there are units too.
yeah, there are units off alleys. So I'll clarify how that exactly works. Because there are units off alleys. So that's that. I did realize one thing that I probably want to clarify. This is not in your packet, and I apologize. I had it already, and then I realized, looking at it today, that I should have tweaked it a little bit, even when it was ready. You folks asked for sort of the implications of what this code change would do, like how many lots would this apply to? And so I pulled all lots between 9,000 and 10,000 square feet, just so you can sort of see the distribution in the community. And then I specifically X'd out ones that didn't have access to 2 streets or a street and an alley. And so you'll see the X marks on some of those ones that don't have access to 2 streets or a street and an alley. And then I also had the thought today that there should be a section in this code specifically that deals with, that limits it to residential areas. And so I do think that there should probably be a criteria that says, oh, I'm sorry. Thanks, Becky. That specifically deals with the requirement to only apply this to residential properties. So that's what you'll see in this map. You'll see a lot of the bigger outlined areas are in the older portions of town, but you'll see also that by allowing it on areas where there's two streets or a street and an alley, it could also open up some possibilities on corner lots and whatnot in other portions of the town. I do think that limiting it to only lots that have access to a street and an alley or two streets makes a lot of sense, because then you're not gonna get funky situations with,
And then you get right of ways through cities.
yeah, exactly right. So that's that. I also think some proposed language that I think makes sense, just adding in here, is any lot that is created, just a new criteria, any lot created will be located in a residential zone, low density residential, medium density residential, high density residential, and mixed density residential, and then specifically call out the fact that no use of the variance is allowed in the single family residential air park, because I imagine that the air park wouldn't want to have people divide their lots in half.
A lot of these areas, in terms of mail, have those boxes.
Yeah.
So then, they don't go to their houses.
Yeah, well, definitely some of the places, definitely, in the older portions of the town, there definitely is, some that would be accessed, that don't have boxes. So anyways, so that's that. Are there any thoughts about this code change? And one of the things that I think is, I mean, I don't think we've seen a whole bunch of people take advantage of this provision in the past. But I do think it makes a lot of sense. I think it especially makes sense when I get folks coming in and saying, my lot's 9,800 square feet, what can I do on it? And I'm like, you can do a single family home and an accessory dwelling unit. Well, I don't want to do that, I want to divide off the property. I'm like, okay. To divide off the property, you've got to attach a unit to your house, right? You could do a townhouse. You could actually do two townhouses. And so then people start thinking, okay, how can I attach a unit to the house? And in some instances, it doesn't make any sense. I'm thinking specifically of one property that has a relatively modern, very shallow pitched roof, right? They have a huge portion of their lot where you can see, you could put a house right there. It's 9,800 square feet. You came in, how can I divide this? I said, well, only way you can do it is if you attach a house to your house right there. You know, that's just not a good way to push people towards. I mean, you know, it's not the proper, it does. I ended up, I'll tell the story. I ended up talking to that guy and I came in, I'm like, man, you know, I just don't really quite feel right about that answer. You know, it's just not the right answer, you know, but it's the only answer. If you want to divide your lot, you've got to attach a townhouse to your house, right? And you could build two of them, right? And essentially you could attach a duplex to that house. It's just, and our city engineer said, is that like sort of, is that the sort of community that you're wanting to create? It's like, no, we don't want to like force people to dumb decisions, right? And that's what our policy in this instance is doing. So I think allowing the possibility to get to a 4,500 square foot lot makes sense. So that's sort of what inspired this change, to essentially give people a valve just in case another situation like that comes up. Any questions about that? Any thoughts about that? All right, I will add that language just limited it to the residential areas just because I think it gets confusing if you apply it to commercial areas too. The third thing, which will not be as part of a public hearing in February, is trying to make land use extensions consistent in our code. And we had talked about this. You'll remember I had a sheet that I gave you folks, and this is the first time you're sort of looking at the language. The language is really way back. On page 29 of the packet. You'll see that I just recommend that we apply it to, in the administrative section, and just say, just essentially define the process. This section says approvals are valid for the following time periods. You can see that on the top of page 30. For type 1 proposals, that's things like historic preservation, staff level historic preservation decisions, site design review, things like that. It would be a 1-year approval. For things like type 2 proposals, like public hearings before you guys, you folks, things like subdivisions, things like big site design review, like Western Interlock, it'd be valid for 2 years from the date of approval. And then it talks specifically, I do think it makes sense to say the following work is required to be complete within their approval timeframe. I looked at some various codes just to see how other people do it, and some people define the type of work that you want done, and so, or that they want done. I think that makes sense. For planning and development, subdivisions, partitions, or lot line adjustments, the applicant shall record a plan, plat, or survey as appropriate for the land use application. That you see be there. For all other land use approvals, the applicant shall begin actual construction or alteration under a required permit, or in the case of a permit not involving construction or alteration, commence the activity. So I think that makes sense. And then it talks about extensions. It says you can, that's going down to 1180, an extension can be granted for 1 year. And I guess my question for you folks is, do you want to put a limit on the number of extensions, or
is there currently any sort of limit or limitation?
There's not.
Are there any communities that have limits?
I'm sure there are.
Do you know, that you don't know of any off the top of your head that?
I mean, I'm sure there are. Like I feel like if you add a limit, you might get yourself in a situation where you want to extend and you can't for some reason.
What would be the benefit of having a limit?
I don't know. It would definitely say you're done now. You know, like you have.
Do we feel like we have a lot of cases that we get to the point of, all right, this is it, or do we usually pretty much extend any extension that's requested?
We've been in the process of extending applications for a relatively long period of time. I told this story last time when I was up in Washington. Their plat approval time used to be 5 years. And then when it hit the 2008 recession, they extended it to 7 years. And when things were still not back after 7 years, they extended it out to 9 years. You know, like they just kept on extending it. And so, like, I mean, sometimes projects just take a while to get off the ground.
Yeah. So Salem kind of had a similar situation during the recession. And then what had happened is once things started picking up, everything started building at once. And it kind of got, like, I'm thinking specifically West Salem, for some of those residents, it kind of got really overwhelming that like 7 like subdivisions that have been like over the course of the years proposed and then delayed, we're starting to build, right? And so I think part of this conversation is being mindful, if we're not gonna have a limit on extensions,
Yeah,
making sure that us as a city are mindful of amount of projects that are getting extensions at one time as one part of our community, so not to overwhelm infrastructure, neighbors,
yeah,
whatever that be, because I think that's my biggest worry about not limiting the amount of extensions.
yeah,
Kind of get into the situation where we're just delaying and people forget, things change, we grow in different ways, and then all of a sudden, all of these conversations we had 10 years ago come and it all starts to happen, so.
I mean, I tend to wonder if that's gonna happen
That's
here too. I mean,
Yeah.
Honestly, like, I feel like some of these projects that have sort of like gotten hung up with interest rates are, once financial situation gets better, they're gonna hit at a similar time.
And once we get to that point, everything's been improved.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's literally nothing we can do as a
Yeah.
city.
Yeah.
And then constituents are like, why did you allow 6 subdivisions to go up all at once? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, we didn't.
Yeah,
But they're just gonna see what's
Exactly.
happening, right?
exactly.
That they're no longer fit the plan for that neighborhood.
Right.
That would be the concern.
So, and I mean, there is, that is one thing that, I mean, what this would do is, currently there is no criteria for extensions. It's how I've sort of been doing it is, if the code has changed, then you don't get an extension, right? But I tried to spell out the criteria specifically in D there. And so you can see some of that stuff, like the extension request shall be filed before the expiration of the previous approval. The proposed extension shall be in conformance with the originally approved plan. That applicant shall satisfactorily demonstrate that they plan to complete the work within the 1-year extension period. And no substantive changes shall have occurred to the applicable code provisions on which the approval was based. And so the idea is that, if there have been substantive changes to the applicable code provisions and the subject plan does not comply with the changes, an extension shall not be granted and a new application shall be required. And so basically that idea is like, hey, the rules have changed. You're no longer able to proceed with this. So that's what I was trying to do with this section, and just to make it clear how to do this. Because again, some of these, the fact of the matter is, some of these extensions some of these approvals never expire. So historic preservation, you get a historic preservation approval, it does not expire. That's probably not a great idea. The original 203 Monmouth historic preservation approval from like 2008 was still in effect when when they came back through to modify that approval in 2021 or whatever,
So some of these projects in theory could be grandfathered in.
Right, exactly.
You go ahead.
It was just, so my worry, or I would want to make sure that people who maybe are asking for extensions, that they know that if the code changes, they won't be able to renew.
Yeah,
And that they need to stay current on what any things that change that affect their laws.
yeah, exactly.
I guess I have a question around number 3, which is the 1 year. How are you going to get this done within a year? If there's no limits to our extensions, and we're asking them every time how they're going to get it done in a year, is that in some ways, is that going to be used against them to make the argument? Because it's like, 5 years ago, you said you were going to get it done in a year, and you're still asking for these extensions, like.
Right, and your plan is exactly the same.
And your plan is the same.
Yeah.
If the problem is an interest rate, no matter what
Yeah,
your plan is, like, it's out of your control, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that makes sense, or if we're not limiting, like, one or the other, right? You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
some feedback.
Yeah, what do you think about 3 as a criteria? Like, I did see it or something similar in other places, and I think that it does make sense. Like, here, we're giving you a 1-year extension. Show us that you're gonna get, how are you gonna get it done in a year?
And so what if they don't? What happens then the next year when they come back?
Yeah, well, then they gotta refine their story. Here, this is what we did this year, and this is how much closer we are to completion now, you know?
And does the decision on the extension, is that one of the ones that goes to you, or does that come to us?
It will come to you folks. It will come to the same body, I'm sorry, it comes to the same body that heard the original application. So if it's a staff level historic preservation review, it will come to me. If it's a staff level site design review, it will come to me. If it's a planning commission, public hearing, subdivision, or site design review, or planning and development, or anything like that, it will come to you folks.
So speaking of projects that we looked at, what's going on with the one that's on Talmadge?
Yeah, so that's one of those ones that you look at and you're like, potentially all of these are gonna hit at a similar time. The one on Talmadge, my understanding is the guy who had bought that from the original applicant is no longer with the property. I don't know.
So there's no.
I haven't heard.
So would they have to resubmit something then?
Right now, I think their engineering is basically submitted. They did, or their engineering is basically approved. Like, we've looked at their engineering, they're basically ready to go. Their subdivision approval is still valid, as well. So, potentially if somebody had money, could install the improvements, they could be going real soon.
What about the one that says Habitat home here now?
I was gonna ask about that. Why
Is it one house they're gonna go there, or they're gonna build several? Or-
It's gonna be the originally approved project.
How many
There was
structures?
five.
Was it
It's 5,
Up to 5
yeah.
that they have to.
Yeah, but that's an excellent example, because today, the neighbor for that project came in and said, what happened to this project? You guys, because we approved it probably 2 or 3 years ago. And now I see there's a Habitat poster out front.
Walking by the last few weeks, they've been located for everything, so something's gonna happen here now.
Yeah,
So they're still gonna build with 5 duplexes?
yeah. They are gonna try and they're gonna make them townhouse
Right,
units, so they're each individually.
right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So is there a way to make it so in some situations, there's an unlimited amount of extensions, and in other situations there are not? So what I'm thinking is, like, for the ones that go to staff, unlimited, the ones that come to planning commission, unlimited. Because us as a planning commission, looking at the same project over and over and over and over again, doesn't seem like a good use of our time or the community's time to be continually, just my perspective.
But it, depends on economic situations a lot of times.
Before pandemics happen.
Right.
Yeah, so we could do something like that.
Okay.
One thing I'll throw out there is potentially, if it's a 2-year time for approval originally, potentially you want to do like a 2-year extension and say you're good for 2 or 3 extensions. And if you're not going on that project by then it's a stinking long time, yeah.
That project on Summit Street with the Habitat sign that's been extended once.
Once. And it's been extended once, and they also changed the design of it once. So they've been in a few times.
Did they ever figure out how to get that garage set back?
I don't know who's I don't know who the architect for the project is. I think so, yes, I think so, absolutely. So what is your thought about extensions? Do you want a longer time period with a set number of extensions?
I guess what I would like to know is, if you're asking for an extension, especially a second or a third time, what's the reason?
Yeah,
Instead of just saying, we need an extension,
right,
let us have some clues so we know whether or not it
Right.
makes sense to keep extending
right.
the
So,
project.
let me see.
Suggesting that we would determine the subjective
Well,
evaluation of their reason then?
I guess it would be
So trying to
subjective,
uncomfortable with planning commission.
but it also would answer people's questions. The developer ran into this issue or whatever. Because people are always asking that.
The present room material is still at 50%.
Yeah.
Is there a way to do like, if it's a like hardship situation, these amounts, and if it's a feasibility as in like, priorities change, codes change, these kind of things, it goes into this category. Because you want to be sympathetic to like economic indicators that are out of a builder's control, but at the same time, we don't want situations where whole properties are in limbo and the community doesn't understand or know what's gonna happen to these areas of our community.
But if, then that puts you in the place if you say no more extensions, what happens then? Do they sell the property? Do they, what do we?
Right, I mean,
We're not in the business of telling
restarting a project is, so I imagine, fairly difficult, because you're having a good example is one project that did get expired was 1075 D Street. It was gonna have 5 duplexes on it. They came through for a couple of extensions, I think.
Is that the one behind Chase's?
Yeah, and right behind,
I've always wondered about that.
that Dollar General. That had an approval. That thing expired, and now to get that back going, you still got engineering that's been done for the site and everything like that, but you're having to go back through a land use approval process. And
Is it still the original owner of the property?
no, it's been through a couple of hands.
And if the subsequent purchasers, have they approached you, Fred, to ask?
No, and I sent a letter saying, hey, this is gonna expire to the name that was on it. So,
So they'll basically, the new owner will have to just start the process from scratch, which is fine, I guess, if they really want to do something.
yeah. So I think that we could say that the applicant shall submit a reason, on number 3, the applicant shall submit a reason for the need to extend the approval and satisfactorily demonstrate that they plan to complete the work within a year.
And are we just saying the reason is just for public information, not
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
any way to judge whether or not they get?
Right, exactly.
Because I think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and it doesn't, it's just saying they shall submit the information and then demonstrate that they need the addition, or that they can complete the work within whatever time period.
Yeah.
Right, that we see fit.
It would just be nice that people in the community would know what's going on.
Yeah.
So does that mean, the way it's written, does that mean it's just automatically gonna be approved, or is there?
No, you guys gotta evaluate that they meet all of those criteria. So if you say you don't have a plan to complete this within a year or 2,
It's exactly the same as your last plan that you didn't get done last time.
yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the thing, right? There's, at some point, it's like, wanna be sympathetic to a
Yeah.
developer, but.
Yeah.
That's why we're open to the case by case and review of the situation. So I think the coding works for the purposes designed.
Cool. So what do you think? Do you folks want a limit on the number of extensions, or what did we?
I think that opens a whole new can of worms.
Until it becomes a problem that needs a change, I'd say, I don't see the reason to put a limit on it quite yet. It's
Yeah.
not something that's come up as a problem, and it could create problems by making it a limit, so.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And you know what? If the city is ever like, you know what, shoot, that would have been the best X right there, you know, boy, that would have been that was the spot for new commercial development. Like, how did we not see it before? And we change the code and we say, that's the new area for commercial development. And then they come back and we want an extension for our subdivision. And then we could say, I'm sorry, you're no longer consistent with the code. That's the best place for commercial development in the community.
Probably
Never
so.
saw it before.
So, we'll have that.
Yeah.
So do we need to have a vote on?
No, this will come back to you probably in March.
Okay.
And it will be, I'll make a couple of tweaks to it, but I think that it will pretty much come in this form. So you'll see it then. And I guess I should just note, like, other portions that kind of talk about timeframes, I would just remove from the other sections of the code and just put them all in one place. So there's, makes it a little easier, yep. Cool. So that's pretty much it. I will say that we do have some other stuff coming up, and maybe that I was gonna talk about that. So there is projects going on right now. I'm not just making small little code changes, we're doing some other stuff too. So we're doing the Central Talmadge project right now, considering the area around Central Plaza Shopping Center, Central High School, and that area. We are gonna have an open house on January 23rd. It's at 5. And you can show up anytime from 5 to 6:30 and find out more about that project. Our consultant is also going to present at the council meeting that night. So I would definitely invite everybody to come to that,
When is that?
January 23rd. And I'm excited about that project. I think I like our consultant for the project, and I like how they're thinking about the area. So
How did it go with your public meeting out there? Did you know where
we didn't. I don't know, outreach is hard. It just takes a whole ton of time, and it's just a difficult thing to do. We have heard from a lot of high school students and whatnot. We've also, one thing that we've been doing is doing stakeholder interviews as part of all our projects that we're doing. We get really good information when we're talking to stakeholders. So we've talked to a whole bunch of property owners out there. And folks like Superintendent Kalista, folks at the gate, just all of that stuff.
Good video.
Yeah, I mean, and that just shows some of our great stakeholders, right? I mean, we've got grocery outlet guy sitting on our panel for the project. We've got the owner of Central Plaza sitting on the panel for our project. We got Jason Clark, who is a facilities manager at, or not facilities manager, he's something with Central School District. We just got a lot of folks it's a good panel. We're also doing the downtown parking experience project. That's still going. You folks are going to see that at a certain point. There's probably going to be a couple of code changes that come out of that project. Maybe a little plan for the future.
Parking meters?
I didn't, your survey didn't show that people were too upset about parking downtown.
I know, it's exactly right. And, even the data itself shows that the parking problem is relatively minimal, really to a couple of blocks. And so the strategy is really coming out of it first is, improve the wayfinding to various parking spots in downtown,
And
so.
some signage there.
Yeah, some signage, like, hey, you can park over there. And then, it talks about, improving the pedestrian walking environment a little bit to make it good and easy, clear to get from one place to another.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah,
12th Street.
Yeah.
Onto Mall.
yeah,
It looks like crosswalk.
yeah, I know exactly.
And somebody's painted over it gray. Is that, and then down by Chase's across the street, you can't cross there now. There's a big thing in the concrete that says sidewalk roads or crosswalk roads.
Yeah,
So
that's not
my
us.
granddaughters were here the other day. For Christmas, we wanted to ride the trolley.
Yeah,
And by the time we figured out how to get to the other side of the street, my granddaughter said, this is too much walking. Because to go to the crosswalk, you have to go down 7th Street
yeah,
or up by McDonald's.
yeah,
So what I want to know is that truly a crosswalk? I mean, I stop for people that are walking across there.
It's a state
But
highway.
any intersection, even if it's not marked, is a
Is
crosswalk.
it a crosswalk?
So what I'll say is we did not paint that. The state did not paint that crosswalk. That was a tactical urbanism project by somebody in the community who did it like guerrilla style themselves. And I can't commend that, but I mean, I do think it's pretty cool that someone's trying to improve walkability in the community, because the fact of the matter,
It needs it.
the fact of the matter is it needs it. There's no crosswalk from 7th Street to Gun Club. Right? We have heard from people exactly what you're saying. We had a little outreach for the Central Talmadge project. We talked to a lady who had family on the other side of the street who drives, even though they're like 3 blocks away, because she doesn't want to cross with her little grandchildren. It's like, I get that. And so one of the things that we're really we're putting forward with the Central Talmadge project is the idea of like improving mid-block crossings. Just to give some more places for people to cross there. We heard it from Ash Creek Mobile Home Park, where they're like, hey, we got Waremart right over there. We got old people living in this complex and we want to get to Waremart. Yeah. It's like, it makes sense, right?
Well, and the trolley stops.
Yeah,
Sometimes there's not a safe place to cross the
Yeah.
street. If
yeah,
you're going one way, you want to get to the other.
Yeah.
And there's not a crosswalk, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And
I've
you-
seen people run in front of cars and putting out safe roads.
yes, it's exactly true. And yet, we tried to locate all the trolley stops near as good a crosswalk as we could get to, but there's a whole stretch of that road that is very auto-oriented. The amazing thing is I hopped on the trolley, knew a kid that was riding, like, hey, where are you riding from? It's like, oh, it's at Weimar. I'm like, from downtown Independence. Like, what are you doing? Like, you went past your stop, and I realized that he had ridden all the way around to get dropped off on the right side of the street. I just think, oh,
That
man,
was what our plan was with our granddaughters. I thought, well, let's
Yeah.
just get on by the auto body shop, then
Yeah.
we'll ride downtown, go through
Yeah.
the park and come around. And
yeah,
even the enticement of hot chocolate up at Rick's place didn't help. And the playground.
So it is a highway, and you said before that the state doesn't want to put stop lights, doesn't want to put in crosswalks. But you made mention of having an abandoned.
yeah, or jurisdictional transfers. So I do think that that's an interesting idea. I'm also asking about the idea of reclassifying that section of the road to make it more like a downtown area where you can improve crossings easier, where it prioritizes pedestrians more. There's some sort of classification change that you can go through. Because, I mean, we have a mid-block crossing in downtown. It's the same highway. It's just a different class portion of the road.
I would say if we ever are interested in the Orphan Highway program, just remember that the expectation will be that we then pay for those improvements from now on, because it will no longer be the state's concern. So there's a lot that goes into that, obviously.
But communities are doing it. Like I was on a panel with a guy from Hood River, and Hood River did a huge chunk of their highway through downtown jurisdictional transfer.
And it made it much more friendly.
Yeah.
It made it much more accessible.
There's good reasons to do it, it's just
How much,
inexpensive.
how much does somebody getting hit by a car cost, you know, Westwood?
Right, right, and I mean, yeah, no, and so I do think that things like mid-block crossings and really thinking about that road is something that we're really trying to do with that project.
You drive up, morning and afternoon when the school's getting out, and the kids just like water buffalo around through this. You just know it's gonna take, and when I was going for the physical therapy, some mornings it'll take me 20 minutes to get to my 8 o'clock, where I live in Palmer.
Yeah.
That's freaking crazy.
Yeah.
And the kids, they just go, I mean, you just have to be prepared.
Yeah.
And the 10-year-old, I mean, that 5 or 6-year-old, she was all about this. Yeah, let's go, Papa, let's go. So the 10-year-old said, no. So,
Seems to me like there should, some safe routes to school funding should be, like, we should be eligible for those kind of programs.
I think we definitely are, and in fact, we are gonna put in a mid-block crossing at like Fifth Street to sort of test the concept, specifically for IES. Just to help to essentially test it out. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't talked much about that project. We're sort of still waiting for it to get off the ground, but one of the ideas in the transportation system plan was to build parallel, and amazingly, it's a Dutch concept. I didn't realize that it was, but essentially to build parallel route, to essentially look, when you got a grid, you can say, oh, you can make this a car primary street, you could make this one a bike primary street. And so, look, we sort of had that idea and the transportation system plan, and with Fifth Street, we think that that could be a very nice bike pedestrian primary sort of street going from Henry Hill into IES. And the neat thing about that is we think that we can essentially connect across from Henry Hill through the Habitat for Humanity project over to Inspiration Garden, and then connect into the southwest portion of the community.
Salem has a really cool one on Union Street that goes right from the railroad bridge. Let's go highway.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a neat idea, and it's just a different way to sort of use. I mean, we have the road there, like we can, and it's not very trafficked. It doesn't really go anywhere, but we can make it a key part of our pedestrian system, the pedestrian bike system. So that's sort of testing the concept, but then I think if we are able to pull that off, we can do it elsewhere too. So.
all right, on our list, I see 2023 accomplishments.
Oh yeah, 2023 accomplishments. So I mean, it's always good to sort of think of what we did. I mean, I don't know, it doesn't look like that long a list, but I mean, we did the housing needs analysis. We talked about downtown height and length standards. We also had 2 pretty massive public hearings with Western Interlock and Brandy Meadows. So, I mean, 2023 was a pretty packed year, I think, for you folks. And we also did a zoning map change near 3rd and G, so that's some good work, I would say. Right? It's always good to
What was the last, the code changes?
the zoning change near 3rd and G. So, yeah.
Okay, and unfinished business we need to address?
Actually, Fred, upcoming was gonna be the housing production strategy as well.
Oh yeah, the housing production strategy project is gonna get started here real soon. as well, that's funded. It's essentially, so the state now, because we're over 10,000 people, we have to do a housing needs analysis and then a housing production strategy. So housing needs analysis sort of identifies what our housing needs are, and then a housing production strategy sort of helps us think about how we can start producing housing to address some of our housing needs. And so that's going to start fairly soon. It's going to be the same consultant group that we worked with as part of our housing needs analysis.
So what would they be looking
Going to be looking at things like zoning. They're going to look at things like our system development charges. They're going to look at things like any number of things. Monmouth just got done with it. One of the things that came out of Monmouth was the need for more multifamily land. And so one of their production strategies was to zone more multifamily land. I think some of the things that could come out of this were essentially some of the things were started to be identified in the housing needs analysis, which included things like potentially more multifamily land, potentially looking at how the mixed density residential zone allocates, or how you do density in that zone, or the unit mix. So some of those things will be included.
So along those lines, it's not for you, this committee, I don't think, but affordable housing, there are monies available to help spur that.
Yeah.
Does this city go after that, or do they have a plan to?
We typically try and work with partners, and what our partners always tell us is find us land. If you've got land, we want to know where it's at. And, I mean, unfortunately, there's just not a whole lot of land that we can point folks to. So
they want land that already has the infrastructure, is that what they want?
no, I think they want anything that they can build on, basically. And I think they want a big enough site where it makes it pencil. So it's not just a smaller site. They would love to get their hands on a bigger.
So like when Habitat Humanity selected the site on 7th Street.
They didn't select it. They essentially found a project that had been approved that somebody was selling.
So the area on the southwest side of town isn't available for that, or
I mean, it is. They're just competing then against the private market,
That's what
so it does make it somewhat challenging.
All right. No unfinished business, any new business?
No, I will say one thing, that there are various sorts of tax abatement programs as well that they'll look at for stuff like affordable housing as well, or to encourage stuff like that. So.
Other discussion, information items?
Oh yeah, so we got one video.
Cue the video.
Cue the video. I will say that this is one of those things where you just, I had heard about this and I just didn't get the issue. It's an ad.
Yeah.
Quaint walkable park.
Okay, now wait a minute, because I need to.
It's a Clint Eastwood movie.
Yeah, spaghetti western.
This is one of those ones where for some reason I just had no conception that this was a thing. And I've seen, we'll watch it and I'll talk about it after. We can talk about it after.
Apartments like this one behind me are a beloved feature in cities around the world. They're inviting and full of character. But here in North America, they are not allowed to be built today. Instead, our apartments are big and imposing, often stretching across an entire block. And the reason why really comes down to one reason: staircases.
Okay. Because I only have the one screen, so.
our second one.
So you gotta share a screen, and here it is right here.
I think it's Jerry.
So let's share it to screen two, and then pull it over to screen two. Oh, click on screen two. Good, and then hit share.
So that's not gonna share.
Yeah, and then you can pull this thing over to over there.
Except I can't because I've got it, where's the
Oh, the minimize.
minimizer?
For times.
Oh, there it is. That's down there to the right, I see it.
Business.
So it's 10. It's even stronger.
Oh, hit play it down on the left hand. So you folks heard what he said, right? Staircases. We're talking about staircases, the one rule holding back.
This type of apartment building is called the point access block. Its defining feature is that all its units share one staircase and elevator to the ground floor, which allows for a smaller, skinnier apartment. And these buildings are a common element in some of the most desirable neighborhoods in the world. So why don't we build these apartments here in North America? Well, in Canada and the US, all apartments above 2 or 3 stories need to give their units access to 2 separate staircases. We're some of the only countries across the world that are this strict about this requirement. In most other places, it only kicks in after 6 or more stories. And this one rule has huge implications. Staircases take up a lot of space, and fitting 2 of them in a small building means that there's much less usable floor space on every floor. As a result, developers here construct much larger buildings so that the staircases and hallways take up a much smaller proportion of the overall building. It's why apartments in North America in general are much bigger and wider than their European counterparts. Now, I'm not here to fat shame our bulky North American apartments. No, the reason I care about this issue is because this requirement is causing some major problems. For starters, it's making it much more difficult to build more housing. Big buildings require big properties, and in many cases, finding a property large enough for a large apartment requires a land assembly. This is where you convince multiple landowners to sell their properties to you at the same time so that you can combine them into one big lot. As you can imagine, this is a risky process that requires negotiations, legal reviews, and a ton of money. Single staircase buildings, on the other hand, can be much smaller, which means you can often build them on just one property. I think that makes these buildings an important solution right now, because cities today are increasingly looking to add more housing into their single-family neighborhoods. Properties in these areas are already small to begin with, and I think it'd be very difficult to add more housing at scale without single staircase buildings. But this requirement isn't just making it more difficult to build new housing, it's also limiting the kinds of housing we can build. The reason why comes down to the hallway connecting the 2 staircases. It cuts the building in 2, which means most of the units on either side of it can really only fit 1 bedroom. Let me explain. So this hotel I'm staying at kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like on the ground. I've got access to a stair over there and a stair over there, but what that really means is that the rooms essentially can only have a window on one side of the wall, because there's a unit over there, there's a unit over there, which is, fine for a hotel room, but for an apartment, this layout can be really challenging to work with. All bedrooms are required by law to have a window, and when you only have windows on one side of your apartment, it's challenging to fit any more than 1 or maybe 2 bedrooms into this layout. To demonstrate, let's take a look at the floor plan of an apartment in Quebec City. Most of its units only have windows on one wall. In fact, this poor unit only has windows on one corner, and because of that, all these units pretty much have to be 1-bedroom apartments. This is a problem because our cities are facing a major shortage of apartments with 3 or more bedrooms, the kinds of spaces that are better suited for families. In Metro Vancouver, 3-bedroom apartments make up 2% of units in the region's rental market, while studios and 1-bedroom apartments make up almost 75%. And this shortage of family-friendly apartments is where I really see the potential of point access block buildings. When you have 1 staircase, you don't need a hallway, which means that units can wrap around the staircase in all sorts of different ways. That makes it easier to have more walls with windows, which allows for apartment layouts with more than one bedroom. Check out this apartment layout from France. You can see that the single staircase allows for a 3-bedroom unit, 2 2-bedrooms, and 2 1-bedrooms. And you know what else that's good for? Smelly roommates. Having open windows on different sides of an apartment makes it easier for air to move through the unit, which provides natural cooling and ventilation. Another upside of the point access block. I'm gonna pause this video for a sec because I'm sure some people will point out that there's this thing called scissor stairs that kind of addresses this issue. This is when 2 stairs crisscross down one column together, effectively taking up less space than 2 separate staircases. I don't want to digress too much, so I'm just going to list a few reasons why, in my opinion, scissor stairs aren't a great replacement for single stairs, but feel free to debate me in the comments. So, why do we have this rule? Why does every apartment require 2 staircases? Well, to understand why, we have to go back in history, back to when cities across North America were adopting their first building codes. Back in the day, one of the biggest threats to your life in the city was dying in a fire. That, and maybe contracting tuberculosis. In fact, every now and then, an entire city would go up in flames, like Toronto in 1849, Montreal in 1852, Quebec City in 1866, Vancouver in 1880, St. John's in 1892, Westminster in 1890, Ottawa in 1900, and Toronto again in 1904.
If you live in Oregon, you could lower your electric bill to less than $30 a month. How? First, you need to live.
That's why cities across North America began to create robust fire safety regulations like this double staircase rule that's still in effect today. The idea behind it was quite simple. If you're in a building that's on fire, you don't want to be stuck with only one option to get out. What if the staircase is full of smoke or blocked or, on fire? So this was a very understandable rule. It was about our safety. But you might be wondering, why is it that this rule is so strict in just North America? Well, cities in Asia and Europe had already dealt with this issue centuries before, but their approach was to require buildings to be made of more fireproof materials, like brick and stone. North American cities, on the other hand, were growing quickly, and it was much quicker to build out of wood than to painstakingly lay bricks and stones. Plus, wood was more readily available in North America, and with the invention of the automobile, cities were on the cusp of suburban sprawl, which would put much less pressure on building compact apartment buildings downtown. Sprinkle in a little bit of classism around housing types, and you have our North American compromise for the building code. Build with less fireproof materials, but compensate with stricter regulations. So sure, we might have had our suburban sprawl here, but at least we got safer buildings. With this double staircase requirement, we've saved countless of lives, while in the rest of the world, people are still perishing in fires in their single staircase buildings. Take that, Amsterdam. Well, that's not exactly true. As you can see on this chart, the US and Canada don't have the fewest fire deaths per capita, not by a long shot. It turns out there are so many other factors that contribute towards fire safety. In fact, it seems like the real success story of our building codes hasn't been so much about helping people escape fires, but preventing them in the first place. For example, regulating the materials buildings are made out of, requiring fire doors, pressurized staircases, sprinklers, fire alarm systems, and fire extinguishers. Today, almost every aspect of your home has been vetted for fire safety. Even your mattress is required by law to be made out of fire-resistant materials. Those requirements have also coincided with a very important cultural change. In most places, smoking indoors is now prohibited. As a result, building fires have decreased about 50% over the past several decades, and they become much less severe. So this requirement to have 2 staircases is hardly the most significant improvement we've made to fire safety by a long shot. And when it gets in the way of new housing supply and family-sized apartments, it does make you wonder, do we need this rule at all? Well, personally, I think that doing away with this rule altogether would be too drastic. It exists for a reason, and in my opinion, the problem isn't the rule itself, but just how broadly we've applied it. I'll remind you, every apartment in Canada above 2 stories has to follow this rule. We're the only country in the world that is this strict about it, and I think we're missing some important nuance. If you live in a high-rise where hundreds of people need to be evacuated in a fire, I get that having 2 separate stairs would still be really important. But what about a 6-story apartment, or even a 3-story apartment? In fact, there are a few cities in North America that have made exemptions to this rule. For example, Seattle. In 1977, the city began allowing apartments up to 6 stories to have just one staircase, provided they comply with other safety regulations. Today, it's one of the few cities in North America where you can see modern single staircase buildings. And for this video, I wanted to visit one for myself.
Perfect, all right, let's stop it there. So isn't that interesting? I mean, that is just, and the state of Oregon just recently, you know, like, they, in that House Bill 3395, it says, one of the things that it requires in there is it requires the building department at the state to consider single access buildings and to develop standards for point access buildings. Isn't that amazing? I just like had no conception, and it's really interesting. I sent Karen, I don't think he explains the whole corridor thing very well, and like how that creates one and really 1 and 2 bedroom units. It's essentially because any sort of unit you create, if you created a studio, you could rent it out for a certain amount. If you create a 3-bedroom apartment, it's essentially 3 of those studios right next to each other. And so if you're doing the economics, you're like, hey, I can get $8 or $1,000 for this studio. I'm not gonna be able to get $3,000 for this 3-bedroom, but I could rent 3 of these studios for $3,000. I'm gonna do the studios instead. Is essentially how the economics works. What I thought was really interesting is, if you're interested, just click on that real quick. There's a manual of floor plans, just a manual of illegal floor plans. It turns out there's a whole community that's talking about this stuff and just seeing the single access stairway and then how to do units off of it and just how the various unit sizes can be configured, and I thought it was kind of helpful just to take a look at it. And so if you're ever bored sometime and you're like, you know what, I want to check out some of those illegal floor plans, I want to check them out, you can go to the manual of illegal floor plans and just scroll on through and see how the units are arranged. But anyways, it will likely at a certain point be coming to a state near you. And I just thought it was interesting getting an explanation why. I had it was something it wasn't even on my radar, other than I knew they were talking about it. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, when we were in Amsterdam, the second hotel we stayed at was a single story, or a single staircase.
Yeah.
It was a 5 level, I think it was 5 floors. Because seeing the houses in Amsterdam, I'm sure that was in Amsterdam. We were told that the reason why houses are so narrow is to keep the taxes down.
Yeah.
You have,
If you go to Charleston, it's the same thing. They have long houses.
Yeah.
All over the East Coast.
Yeah, one thing that, just read the propaganda on it, one thing that they said is, there's so many good movies where the fight scenes take place in the single access stair, when people are like falling through the center of it and whatnot, so I thought that's a good point too. Like they're an iconic sort of thing, but we don't build them here. It's interesting.
All right.
And I thought it was interesting too that Seattle, I did something about it in 1979 or the 70s. It's like, isn't that amazing? Wow, that's really interesting.
I always assumed it was a parking issue, that you can't, you're never gonna have enough parking spaces for a place like that, so you couldn't build it.
That's probably true.
Staircases.
It's probably parking too.
But if you were renting 3 bedrooms to a family, if there were younger kids, you wouldn't need as much as if you had 3.
Well, we're making some assumptions, but yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if they're all teenagers. then they're all gonna need.
But if you're in a city that can support that kind of building, you probably have much better public transit.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So,
Right, any other discussion, commission items? If not, we can.
And we'll be adjourned.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
uh-oh, guys, it looks like the beat down's on.
What's it now?